So in this video, we're going to expand our discussion of the ability of benzylic and allylic positions to stabilize anions. And this is applicable in the case of acidity. So we're going to rank the following indicated protons here from lowest to highest pKa. So keep in mind that the lowest pKa is also known as the most acidic. And if we consider each of these acids as a monoprotic acid, I'll call them HA through HD. Then the acidity of HX, the acid, will track with or increase with the resultant stability of its conjugate base, where the conjugate base is X minus and has a negative charge. So if some base is to come in and deprotonate each of these, so let's say, for example, it's just the typical base like hydroxide, then the mechanism for deprotonation looks like this, where the CH sigma electron density is going to land on this primary carbon in the case of a lone pair, or in the form of a lone pair.